to have here with me this evening. On my immediate right is Professor Alex Awiti, a policy analyst. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Next to him is Joy Kiru, an economist. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
And also Irungu Houghton, who's the executive director at Amnesty International. Welcome to the program.
Good evening, Wahika.
Thank you so much. Let me quickly, and I'll start with you, Irungu, get a sense from you of what you consider your highlight today, and if there was any low moment, what would that be?
So there were very many moments, I think, that were remarkable today. I think if I was to pick a low moment, really, would be potentially the tirade of the deputy president now, when he spoke about freedom is coming. And it was a two-edged, I think, presentation. On one hand, I think we can welcome his commitment to an open democracy. He talked about protection of civil servants. He talked about the need for us to de-install Signal and WhatsApp on our phones.
And I want to get a sense from you on that a bit later on. Carry on, carry on.
I haven't what do you call it, deinstalled.
Deactivated.
I haven't deactivated my two smartphone apps yet. But he talked a lot about patience, tolerance, building a sense of openness within the Republic. And I think we have to welcome that. But I think we also have to be careful. And as we've been seeing, there's been so many cases where people have actually called on the incoming government to exercise restraint, to be respectful, particularly of those people who opposed them during the campaigns. And it's not just state officers, but it's also political opponents. And I think the concern is that if you still follow the social media platforms, there's a lot of vengeance, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hurt still being directed at very many quarters, including the four IEBC commissioners, journalists that covered stories in ways that the Kenya Kwanza team were unhappy about. And I think we have to bring that negative campaigning to an end and really open up a new spirit that says, essentially, we have closed the door on negative campaigning and we are now creating a republic for everybody, regardless of how they voted or even if they didn't vote at all.
Irungu, I'll come back to talk about what you're hoping to see from a human rights perspective moving forward. But Joy, I know the economy is your forte. Did today's speech or speeches hit the right note for you?
Yes. Let me start by, you asked two questions, the lowest and the highest and the best moment.
Let's start with those ones then.
For me, my lowest moment is actually Rigathi Gachagwa's lowest moment in that. Can you imagine campaigning, preparing for this one day, and then you have a challenge, or rather you are unable to say your vows as eloquent as always you are, as your normal self. I think I was almost panicking with him, and I was like, goodness, this cannot be happening at this time. But lucky for us, he was able to pick it up and say his oath, and he was sworn into office. So that was one low moment there, but it ended well. My highest moment is just what you had asked me about, the president's speech. I was curious on the campaign period is up, is over. There's no time for giving Kenyans wish list. What is he going to tell us? I was really keen. And I think his speech touched on things that Kenyans really want to hear. He talked about doing something about the cost of living, and he made something about agricultural productivity, improving productivity, which will have a big implication on food supply and hopefully food prices, all things constant, remember? And he also touched on issues of health. I think that was great. He also touched on issues of housing. He talks about SMEs, which is really a big sector that creates employment. In other words, and what was exciting at that moment is that we saw him take advantage of the quick wins, things that you could do immediately. He said he was going to fulfill them immediately. I think that was really nice, and we hope that it's going to be equally zealous in implementing the policies that will ensure that it delivers to Kenya as per the plan.
As per the plan.
Yes.
And we'll dig deeper into that as we continue. But Prof. Awiti, policy-wise, did you hear a new policy direction from what we've seen from over the last 10 years with Jubilee? Or did you get a sense it's a repackaging of what's been there previously?
So mine, I think there are two things policy-wise that are hugely significant and related to kind of my big issues around planetary stewardship. Ending the fuel subsidy, I think, is an absolutely important thing to do. We must pay the full cost of using fossil fuels that are extremely polluting. And as we do that, then figure out how to transition to renewable energy sources, green energy. We have abundant solar, wind, geothermal resources that we need to start thinking about. Related to that is to move to a sensible public transit system using light rail and, of course, bringing hybrid buses and electric vehicles into the public system. So I hope that he understands the logical connections that relate to this. Otherwise, the hurt is going to be extremely deep. Fuel now with the government subsidies is 159 because global fossil fuel prices have gone up for petroleum. Now, if he removes the subsidy, then it's going to be pretty chaotic. And it's exactly the opposite of easing the cost of living. He talked about the deficit in terms of maize production. He's basically reduced the price of fertilizer from 6,500 to 3,500. And his immediate focus has been tea. He says that's where his priority is. Because we've lost the growing season. We're in the short growing season. The short growing season does not produce sufficient maize, and we have a deficit of 10 million metric tons. Okay? Now, when you look at that, it means that in the immediate term, there's going to be tough times for Kenyan families. So I think to calibrate that
that's not
back
what they were hoping to hear.
That's what we're hoping for.
That's
but
what they were hoping for.
This is now what I said when we had the presidential debate, that elections are conducted in poetry, but governance happens in prose. This is now the fine prose of the Ruto administration. And the deputy president was absolutely clear. He called for patience. And his timeline is give us 2 years before we start to kick the economy. Now, the other good thing that he did, which is extremely bold, I think the Credit Reference Bureau thing has been an absolutely nonsensical piece of legislation or piece of regulation. What he's moving towards is a point system, which then creates an evidence-based model for determining credit, for determining...
what I think is used in the States.
So it gives you an interest rate that is determined based on evidence on your credit, on your behavior. So there's an incentive there for you to be good in the system. So that means that you pay your rent. If you owe private debt, you basically pay because the credit is a point. So that means that we can now determine little kind of packets of interest rates that they would give to you. So I go to the bank and my points are not good. I get 15%. You've got good credit rating. You get 5%. Now, the other one is this ceiling on transactions. This is a million thing.
1 million.
1 million thing, which I also thought was a very, very silly thing to do. Because I think, as the president pointed out, is that the idea is to stop illicit public money transfers. If we move to blockchain and distributed ledger technology, you can actually trace every transaction in the economy. So you don't need this 1 million ceiling.
You don't need to limit.
You have a $100 billion economy, and you're telling me that you're denominating a cap on transactions to $10,000. That is absolutely ludicrous. So this is absolutely spot on, and it is the right thing to do. When it comes to housing, I think it opens a whole bundle of potential trickle effects and ripple effects in the economy. One, we have to change the building code. We build houses out of stone, and these things are so expensive, and it's unnecessary. And that's why housing is unaffordable. We have a ton of local material, and we need innovation in this space to basically change how we build houses. Nobody is going to live here 100 years. Why do we build houses that are going to last 200 years, for crying out loud? So innovation in building materials and construction stuff, and then the quality of life and the cost of living will change when the cost of housing drops.
Okay, and I'll interrupt you there because we're coming back to get deeper. Irungu, I'm not going to force you to talk about the economy unless you want to. But I'm going to ask you, this whole week, talk shows around the country have been talking about what will former President Uhuru Kenyatta be remembered for. And I guess I could ask you now officially, in your view, what will he be remembered for as you reflect?
So I think the things that probably will linger in people's memories will be the infrastructural development. I think the energy that went into regional and international foreign policy, the leadership around universal health education and universal primary education in the early days. I think these are the things that we will probably remember the president for. I think, you know, as Amnesty, we did a scorecard on the Jubilee administration, which we released just before the elections. And we essentially had, I think the figure was something in about 40% is what we gave the Jubilee administration, and scorecarded it fairly low on a number of issues. I think the key things that for us were very important were things like, for example, failure to bring extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances to an end, a recurrent pattern of forced evictions, and I was very glad to hear the Deputy President today speak about an end to this, and I think it's been echoed by the incoming Nairobi governor as well. We spoke a lot about the failure of universal health coverage and that it wasn't able to be sustained and rolled out across the country. So these were some of the challenges that I think you know, the Jubilee administration had. Today's speech, I thought, was remarkable, I think, by the president. I think Alex has talked about a couple of policy issues, but if I can just go on and just speak about a number of other issues. I thought he was executive in the way that he came across. There were very specific issues that he raised. One of the important things really was the independence of the judiciary and a reaffirmation of the judiciary fund and the expansion by 3 billion for the judiciary, and really the expansion of the small claims courts, which are really, you know, ordinary people's courts. These are the places that really kind of vexatious for ordinary people. The appointment of the 6 appeal judges, he promised, and by the end of the day that had happened. I think the second area was really around the independence of the police service, and we will wait to see whether there is a purge of the leadership of the National Police Service. But I think the important point that he made today was that the police service must never be used as an instrument against any citizen or any political opponent of the government. And I think that's an important statement and something that we should continue to track. I think the third area really relates, and I'm sure there was jubilation in Mombasa, and this perhaps is an economic question, which is the return to clearance in Mombasa rather than at ICD here in Nairobi and elsewhere. And I think, you know, these were some of the campaign promises. What I remain, you know, what I remain waiting to hear a little bit more about is how this administration will restore a sense of, or rather recalibrate ethics and values in the public. I mean, I think we have too many people, both young people and old people, who just don't believe that hard work gets you anywhere these days, that studying gets you a degree, that you can actually buy any of these things if you have enough money and if you're privileged or if you're connected enough. And as people scrambled, I think, to the, rightfully, I think, to the event at State House this afternoon, I just hope that there weren't people that were going there essentially looking for favors and to start new cartels, because that essentially has been the danger and the threat to this country. And I really hold out that the Kenya Kwanza administration will be able to deal with issues of corruption decisively, that they will deal with issues of impunity, and that we will see really a resurgence of ethical values in the line with our constitution, rather than the sleaze, corruption and impunity that was there under Jubilee.
I think the last statement you made there really has been the elephant in the room. And I have another question on that, and I'll come back to that. But Joy, a lot was said about the economy today. A lot of it centered on subsidies, price controls, etc. Were there any questions that were left unanswered in your mind as you listened to the speeches? Were you asking yourself, where's debt in all this and so forth? What were those for you?
Let me start by the narrative that was made by the Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua. When he said that they're inheriting, he repeated the same narrative, empty coffers. Could be true. We are taking a big, huge debt. That's true. But the truth, but there are also other things that they are actually inheriting that they did not talk about. And this is what we would like to hear them confess and how they are going to take us forward. For example, they are inheriting a relatively good infrastructure. Most of the country, compared to 10 years ago, that Rigathi Gachagua thinks that we were better, the infrastructure is way better today than it was 10 years ago. They're inheriting a relatively good working KRA. Last quarter and the other one, they managed to meet their targets and also slightly go above their targets. Revenue collection, that is something good that they're inheriting. They're inheriting relatively good institutions to start. He's saying that they're starting from scratch. I disagree. They're not starting from scratch. Their bottom-up approach has got good institutions. The youth fund is already there. Okay, they may be weak, the institution's fine, but they're not starting from scratch. They've got something to build on, to strengthen, and to transform and move forward. The youth fund is already there, and devolved government taking resources to the people down there is already there. The Uwezo Fund is already there. There is the affirmative action. There is the AGPO, the public procurement bill that caters for women and youth. So they're inheriting institutions that they just need to strengthen and transform and implement their policies. And lastly, they are also inheriting a country which is highly respected as we speak now, a favorable global destination, and a business hub in the Eastern and South and Central Africa. Those are gems that they are inheriting, that they are taking over. So the point is, to get this together, it costs money. It costs money, and that's why the debt is there. So now what we would want them to do, and that they are not telling us, we want to hear a good plan for fiscal consolidation. How are they going to rein over their spending? And how are they going to ensure that this spending does not again make the people's livelihoods bad? That is, they do not worsen the situation, because if you talk about reduction of government spending, social sectors are likely to suffer. So we need a plan of fiscal consolidation, reducing the budget deficits, reducing debt, how they're going to do that, while at the same time ensuring that the common person continues to do well economically. That's where the challenge is. And I think that is what you want to hear. They have institutions, so how are they going to make them work for us and move us from where they are?
It's all about
And they have also inherited an economy that is growing. 2020, we contracted by 0.3%. 2021, we were up again, 6.7%. And now we are doing 5.5%. So they're inheriting something that is functioning. It's not the best. So overall, I think the president, that is the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, handed the baton, not exactly sprinting, but again, not too slow like they are trying to say. So they should give him some credit.
And not exactly sprinting, but not too slow. And so,
yes.
So for you, Prof. Witi, and I guess this might be more of a leadership question than a policy question, what do you then do in this honeymoon period? First 100 days when people are still rosy-eyed, they're still getting used to your new terms and appointments are being made. Do you move quickly and ruthlessly in effecting your agenda? Do you move cautiously? Sort of, what's your advice as this new...
Well, there's no honeymoon. Unfortunately, President Ruto and Deputy President Gachagua will have no honeymoon. This is roll up your sleeves and get the job done. I think, just to enjoy his point, I think the Deputy President needs to temper down the tirade of grievance. He is dragging the country back with his consistent pivot to his personal grievance, and also just calibrating an economy that I can't relate to. This is not a battered economy. This is not a dilapidated economy.
Well, to be fair, the many small-scale traders out there who say that they have been...
But you have to understand...
The last 5 years have not been the best for them. You have to
understand the global context in which President Uhuru governed. This is the longest pandemic in the history of mankind. And then you have the war in Ukraine. On the back of that, then you have blistering drought, the worst in 40 years. There is no magic you can work. These small traders rely on agricultural produce. This is what drives the economy. Agriculture collapses, everything underneath it collapses. In fact, agricultural growth tracks economic GDP very, very well. It's a perfect correlation, consistently. And every time the economy has been battered, save for elections and the chaos that obtain around that basically undermine investor confidence, it is a perfect correlation. So it is important for people to understand that. And as Joy has said, this is a solid country. Gachagua himself has made money over the last 10 years in what he calls a battered economy.
Do you think
irony.
we could do with more pro-poor policies? And I think that's been the concern by many.
Yeah, the pro-poor policies have just not been the hallmark of administrations in this country from the previous years, from Jomo Kenyatta, from Daniel Arap Moi, not even Kibaki. It's always been big business. This has been an economy that believes in trickle-down. It means that if you give the top guys a break and they make the money, it trickles down. Now, that trickle down has not created the jobs. That's why we have over 900,000 young people getting into the job market who only less than 50,000 can get jobs in the formal sector. So where does the trickle down work? When you're giving money to the guys who obtain in the formal sector, and they trickle down only 50,000 jobs. The rest of the guys, 850,000, bring your own job. The hustler question. And that has basically been the fundament of President Ruto's campaign. Now, he has to deliver for them. But one of the things that I need to say also that hasn't worked and has not been very clear, there are critical gaps in what the president said today. It was a very loaded, fast speech. I didn't think he was going to go into all that kind of detail. But there are still issues about, for instance, broad statements like better performance of devolution. How are you going to hold the devolved systems accountable? He is talking about transfer of pending functions. The question is, will that also come with responsibility on these transfer functions? Institutional capacity is an issue in the county governments as we know them. They're not properly established. And now beyond services, counties must be growth engines for the country. This is not just where you take money so that you can now pay salaries and all of that. So where is the investment plan? We talked about one product, one county in Azimio. We've got a national special plan. So now those are the details that I think he needs to think about. And I also think that the question of unemployment, they basically give you the headline statistics. So I think what the president did today was to highlight potentially where his immediate priorities are going to be. But these are 65 points. 65 points, 1 point a day, 100 days. I think a lot of these things are not going to be done by executive decree. A lot of these are going to take a lot of hard work to basically reorganize the economy. And as Joy has basically said, we have a public debt that is about 60% of national revenues. We have pending bills that are basically crippled and collapsed businesses. We have a wage bill that is basically like an albatross on our necks. We have a revenue plateau. Now, how are you going to resuscitate an economy that basically begins to drive all of these things? So this 2-year mark, which Gachagua talks about, is plausible and realistic. The problem is, will we have the patience to wait? When are people going to basically now say, this is not going the direction that we wanted? How is the president going to consistently be that provider of hope and confidence and the person who constantly pleads for confidence, but in that process also gives a very clear record of where he's going and the steps that he's making to basically ease the pain? Because now what people want is instant gratification. They can't wait too long. And a taxi driver was telling a friend of mine today that with the swearing in, he expects to see more money in his pocket. Yeah. And ironically, my friend was a first customer at 11. So the guy woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning. His first customer checked in at 11 a.m. in the morning. And that was 3 days ago. So this is the wave, the tsunami of expectations, and you could see that at the stadium. And then you also take into account that the country is divided down the middle.
Let me jump in and get Irungu to say something. I know we will need to release you in just a bit. Irungu, is there anything that you feel was left unsaid? We've heard from the economic perspective. From a human rights perspective, was there anything you were hoping to hear that didn't quite come out clearly, that you'd hope the government would address?
So, I mean, there are a range of issues that could have been covered, but, I think it was a loaded speech, I think, as Alex has said. But, I mean, just following on from what Alex has said, I think we have to recognize that, the 18 million voters that felt that are not behind this administration. There are just over 6 million that are supportive of them. Many of them are young people. And therefore, the question about how do you create the patience around the kind of trade-offs that an administration needs to do for the things that are really not of their making, but are part of the global context, the pandemic, the famine, Ukraine, and various other global issues that I think Alex has talked about. And I think one of the things that would be interesting for this administration and the county administrations to do is to look more closely at how do you manage or how do you facilitate public participation so that budget transparency, budget oversight becomes a public citizens, arena. It becomes a space where people can understand this is the envelope, this is the financial envelope, this is all we've got, and involve people in what you want to spend that money on. Because I think the danger will be, and I think there were moments, I think, for Jubilee when they became kind of a fortress Jubilee. They sat apart, they stopped consulting. Key leaders within the administration came off social media and therefore were just losing touch with, mechanisms that would have allowed for people to be involved in the decision-making processes. And I think whenever you have tremendous expectations, you have to create avenues and spaces to ventilate those expectations so that people can be involved in the process. Economic literacy, voter literacy is probably at one of its lowest, despite all the investment in the infrastructure and so on. And I think that is one of the drivers potentially of a very restless, a very rebellious, and possibly resilient. Well, I was not resilient, but a resignational. It's a kind of a rebellious population that would challenge administration at a point when it is actually at its weakest. So I think we have to think about, how do we bring people into the conversations around budgets, around what's possible. Otherwise, I think the administrations will be left exposed.
Well, I hope key stakeholders in the new government are listening to this discussion tonight, because a lot being said from a human rights perspective and economy as well that is very interesting and food for thought. And these are things we'll be looking out for. Joy and Professor Awiti, I'll be coming to you shortly. We carry on with our discussion, but I've got a few news updates to give at this time. And here's the latest now from the world of sports, where 5 rookies have been added to the national volleyball team, the Malkia Strikers, for the World Championships after a 2-month training camp in Brazil. Veronica Diambo, Veronica Kilabat, Immaculate Nekesa, Meldina Sande, and Belinda Barasa are in the team headed to Poland and Holland for the championships that start on the 23rd of September. Experienced players Mercy Moim, Noel Murambi, Gladys Ekaru, and Sharon Chumba have been retained in the squad of 14 players that has a blend of youth and experience. The team leaves Brazil on Wednesday for Serbia, where they'll play 2 more friendly matches before proceeding to Holland. Now, Kenya has a litmus test in the first match, where they play host Holland in the opening match on the 23rd of September. Daniel Kiragu of the Muthaiga Golf Club is the overall winner of the 2022 Sir Nick Faldo Kenya Golf Championships after a second sudden death playoff with Elvis Muigua of the Kiambu Golf Club. The playoff was determined after they both scored 228 points gross after 3 rounds of 18 holes. Other winners that have qualified to play in the Sir Nick Faldo Series Grand Finale in Abu Dhabi are Chanel Wangare and Krish Shah of the Vetlab Sports Club and Faith Ontune of Golf Park Golf Club. The tournament played at the Limuru Golf Club attracted 62 elite junior golfers drawn from different clubs across the country, including Limuru, Golf Park, Muthaiga, Kiambu, Vetlab, Windsor, Nakuru, Thika Sports, Naivasha, Royal Nairobi, Domberi, Karen, Nyali, Kenya Railway, and the Sigoni Golf Clubs. Well, beyond Kenya's borders, 3 English Premier League matches scheduled for the weekend have been postponed ahead of Queen Elizabeth's funeral, the Premier League has announced. The big clash between Chelsea at home against Liverpool